Hi everyone, this is Elizabeth from Strange Ago. In this video, we are going to explore a few weird stories about people and their chicken coops. In the recent past, just about everyone had a chicken coop to furnish their kitchens with fresh eggs and meat. In cities, towns, and in the countryside, these coops dotted the scenery and were a common place to chat with the neighbors, find thieves, and start a romance. For these reasons alone, chicken coop adventures dominated the gossip scene and local newspapers across the world. Just like modern times, people will sometimes get married in weird places. Take, for instance, the case of Mrs. Sumner of Kansas City, Missouri. As the newspaper reported, Mrs. Sumner married her husband inside of a chicken coop back in 1914. The report said that it was all for some sort of prize, but it definitely was not worth the hassle of the occasion. Only 2 years had passed when Mrs. Sumner had to file for divorce. Apparently, her husband had flown the coop and ran all the way to Nebraska to get away from her. While one couple was foolish enough to get married while standing inside a chicken coop, 2 other couples in Maryland had a chicken coop problem of their own. According to the missus, Mr. Godey was in the habit of meeting up with Mrs. May at the chicken coop in the middle of the night. Their story was that they were just giving the chickens a late night feeding, but Mrs. Godey was too smart to fall for that old story. The missus discovered that the two were having a rather romantic tryst at the coop, and she promptly filed for divorce. Sadly enough, the wayward husband refused to grant his wife a divorce, and the judge agreed with him. The judge did, however, chastise Mr. Godey for careless conduct and ruled that Godey pay the costs of the case brought before him. There were a great number of reports in the past about odd things being found inside of chicken coops. In 1945, it was reported that American officers discovered an incredible fortune hidden inside a chicken coop near Tokyo, Japan. The coop contained several crates of platinum and a package containing 8,000 carats of diamonds. In 1952, agents from the French Counter-Espionage Bureau raided the home of a suspected communist. They had no luck finding any information inside the home, but a search inside the chicken coop uncovered plans to blow up power stations and paralyze France's largest naval base. Burglars of all sorts also thought that the chicken coop was the perfect place to hide their stolen items, but it was a hiding place so commonly used that the police had no problem searching through the chickens. In Randwick, a suburb of Sydney, a man had stolen the contents from a safe and then hid them in the corner of his chicken coop. Under suspect, the police searched the man's house and his chicken coop and discovered the suitcase filled with the loot. The man was arrested and charged with stealing, and the victim got his belongings back. There were a great number of heartbreaking cases reported of people found living inside of chicken coops. One report published in 1912 gave the sad story of Mrs. Annie Nelson of Minnesota, whose home had burnt down. She and her 10 children had to live inside their chicken coop, having only chickens to eat until hunters discovered and rescued them. In Bankstown, New South Wales, 1922, a mother and her 4 small children were found living in a former chicken coop. The local health inspector investigated the living conditions and decided that the place was unfit for human habitation. Leo Spacek of West Virginia was discovered living inside of a chicken coop back in 1951. He had gotten into an argument with his wife, and in turn, his mother-in-law booted him out of her house. He stayed inside the chicken coop until health inspectors discovered him in poor condition due to starvation and exposure. When questioned by the hospital authorities, the mother-in-law forbade him from returning to her property, stating that even the chicken coop was off-limits to him. A case of terrible parenting skills was reported in 1910. One evening in Chicago, neighbors contacted the police about a little boy in a chicken coop. The police went to investigate and found a 5-year-old boy sleeping inside the coop with the chickens. The boy was woken up, and it was learned that his father worked nights as a waiter and that his mother went to visit some friends. The neighbors had tossed an old shirt and a burlap sack over the fence so that the boy could keep warm in the chill air. Police took the child to the station, and after getting in touch with the mother, learned that she had often placed the child in the coop when she had to leave the house. She felt that it was the safest place for the child. The court must not have had a problem with the treatment and merely fined the mother $25 for their involvement. In old cartoons, we would see characters rigging shotguns to go off at the pull of a string without ever realizing that people used to do this all the time in real life. However, the stories that can be found in the newspaper archives are the tragic results of such rigging. Back in 1916, a Pennsylvania farmer, Jerry Rhodes, was having problems with a chicken thief. Figuring that he would set the thief straight, he rigged his loaded shotgun to go off when someone would open the chicken coop door. Unfortunately, Mr. Rhodes must have forgotten about his special setup and opened the door one day without disarming the trap. He was shot and killed by his own contraption. Mr. and Mrs. W. McDonald's son began to believe he was a dog. For several years the child barked and behaved in a dog-like manner. The parents tried everything they could back in 1911 to convince their son that he was not a dog, but the boy would become unruly by the mere suggestion. The New Jersey parents gave in to the boy's strange behavior and began using him as a family watchdog. They chained the boy to the chicken coop where he lived and kept watch. The boy insisted that they give him bones to gnaw on, and when they wanted to dress him, they had to sew his clothing onto him because he refused to get dressed like the average person. Eventually, a neighbor complained about the barking, and representatives of the Board of Health showed up at the couple's home. They were astonished to see the boy playing watchdog out back, but after the parents gave their reason, it appears that nothing was done to help the child or investigate the parents. Johnson, a landowner, was showing off a property in North Dakota in 1914. The land may have looked promising to the buyer, but upon inspection of an old unused chicken coop, Johnson and Company got quite a surprise. Inside was a well-deceased body of a man. Police were brought in to identify the man and investigate the scene, but it did not take long to figure out what had happened. The deceased was John Hegberg, a Swedish man in his 30s who moved around from farm job to farm job. After he completed a job on a local farm, he bought some alcohol, got drunk, and decided to curl up in the vacant chicken coop for the night. A cold snap took place that night, and Hegberg froze to death in his sleep. His body was discovered several days later with bottles of alcohol still in his pockets. It was an unspeakable event that lit up the newspapers in 1922. Opal Ramsey of Oklahoma, 18 years old, had been grabbed by a group of women wearing their husbands' Ku Klux Klan sheets. They bound the girl's hands and feet, stripped her down to her waist, and lashed her. As if that was not enough, the sheeted women, all reported to be good Christian wives, forced Opal into a chicken coop at an abandoned farm and began dropping worms and insects on her. The girl screamed and begged for mercy, but the women were not finished with her. A group of them went to the bushes and, after laying their white sheets on the ground, began beating ticks from the branches. They collected these and dropped them over the girl. Finally finished, they left her in the coop overnight until she was discovered the next morning suffering from shock. The police, of course, investigated the crime and discovered that local women were angry at the girl because she wore city clothes and had the audacity to speak to one woman's husband over a fence. Opal was able to identify two of the masked women who tormented her. Both of these women were arrested, although they denied having anything to do with Opal's torment. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to Strange Ago.